The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
In the face of what appears to be impending doom to the strategy of defunding Obamacare, Republicans are now taking a strategy that, Lewis, I can really only describe as completely disconnected from reality and incredibly selfish, childish, and juvenile. I'll tell you what's going on, and this is written up in the Washington Post. The Senate is ready to send a new version of the Obamacare defunding bill back to the House, and it's simply not going to include the defunding of Obamacare. In other words, it will fund government, it will avoid the government shutdown, but it's not going to defund Obamacare, exactly as we predicted. So now Republicans, in I guess some kind of final act of desperation, are trying to insert all sorts of completely unrelated nonsense into the bill. And we've seen this done many times before, have we not, Lewis?
Of course, yeah, all the time.
So in addition to delaying the implementation of the health care law for a year, the new idea from Republicans is to establish a timetable for tax reform, squeeze $120 billion from federal health programs over the next decade, and also cut federal civil service pensions. It would also, now listen to this, it would also approve construction of the Keystone XL oil pipeline, and it would advance a number of other Republican goals as written in the Washington Post, including increasing the offshore drilling for oil, blocking federal regulation of greenhouse gas emissions, restricting most forms of federal industry regulation. The only thing missing, as is astutely written in the Washington Post, is a ban on late-term abortions, which privately some Republican aides are saying is being considered. Lewis, this is despicable. This is a complete waste of taxpayer time and money, a perversion of the democratic process, and not altogether surprising.
Not surprising. It's embarrassing. You know, it really, truly is embarrassing. I'm embarrassed to be an American citizen when I hear that things like this are happening in government. And I hope the rest of the world is kind of blind to this, because I don't want them laughing at me.
Yeah, and remember, the debt ceiling, which is part of the controversy here, that Republicans are now very concerned that President Obama is going to raise the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling was raised 7 times under George W. Bush, and Paul Ryan, Eric Cantor, John Boehner, Mitch McConnell, all of these Republicans and many more voted to raise it each and every time. So again, if we are to step back and say, let's explore honestly whether raising the debt ceiling does or doesn't make sense. Let's assume that we're going to have that conversation in an honest way. What is the difference now than when these same Republicans voted to raise it under George W. Bush? It becomes very clear what the situation is, which is that this is all about getting in the way of President Obama, something that Republicans vowed to do from the day President Obama was elected. And for all of the problems with the two-party system, the similarities between Democrats and Republicans, the perversion of politics by the invasion of money, for all of that stuff, this is just flat-out obstructionism.
Right. It's basically like a cafeteria food fight. I mean, you've got both parties on either side. It's so juvenile. It's so ridiculous.
In the wake of Ted Cruz's fake filibuster, he did this fake filibuster that we talked about yesterday, which wasn't really a filibuster, in part because for part of it, he was reading bedtime stories, and whether that really should be considered part of a talking on-topic filibuster, I don't know. But also because it wasn't really a filibuster, in that the procedure, House procedure, Senate procedure, had already established that no matter what he does, he was going to have to stop the following afternoon and things were going to move on. So it was really just a call for attention. Some right-wingers are absolutely loving it, hailing Ted Cruz as a hero, not the least of which is our buddy Brian Fisher from the American Family Association, who is saying that Ted Cruz is basically a modern-day Elijah the prophet. Now, Lewis, I love hyperbole. I love delusions of grandeur. We've talked about Newt Gingrich being like Pericles, Abraham Lincoln, Moses, Margaret Thatcher, Copernicus, so on and so forth. We talked yesterday about how one Republican was likening defunding Obamacare to fighting the Revolutionary War. But now we have Brian Fisher making a hero, almost like a religious hero, out of Ted Cruz. Watch this.
But this really has been Ted Cruz's fight. Remember in the days of Elijah, he thought he was the only one, and God said, no, I've got 7,000 that have not bowed the knees to Baal. But somebody had to stand up and confront the prophets of Baal. That was Elijah. Now, our Elijah today confronting the prophets of Baal is Ted Cruz. And last night was his showdown on Mount Carmel. Remember that deal at 1 Kings 18? You've got all the prophets of Baal. There's 400 or 850 of them, depending on how you count.
I like that little thing at the end, depending on how you count. How does Brian Fisher not realize, even if he doesn't like Obamacare, let's say he wants Obamacare defunded, how doesn't he see through this particular completely fabricated political event, this faux filibuster, and realize that this is just Ted Cruz setting himself up for video clips, essentially for video sound bites for 2016. That's all this is, and Brian Fisher either doesn't realize or doesn't care.
Right. I don't know much about Elijah. I'm not sure how this how this comparison is supposed to work. But if it has to do with being a prophet, then you know what? Brian Fisher may very well be correct.
In what sense?
In that Ted Cruz knows that this will help him get reelected in the future.
Oh, I see. Right. Yeah. He is prophesizing that staging a fake filibuster might help him politically in the future. It's a good point. And remember, this fake filibuster, all it shows is Ted Cruz's total and utter disrespect for the democratic process, divided powers, and the Supreme Court, all of which were involved in creating, establishing, passing, evaluating, and upholding Obamacare as a constitutional and democratically created piece of law. Ted Cruz, by staging this absurd fake filibuster, seems to be disrespecting those things which you would think Brian Fisher does support.
You would think so, but I think the only thing Brian Fisher supports is the Bible and his twisted interpretation of it.
Remember, $174,000 a year is what Ted Cruz makes, plus the cost of the overnight charade, which he spent part of reading Dr. Seuss to his kids via C-SPAN too. I mean, it is just unbelievable, and it doesn't stop with Brian Fisher. Let's go now to Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck, in the wake of the Ted Cruz complete farce of a filibuster, decided to outline what would be his ideal government. I warn you, this may make you sick to your stomach. Take a look.
Here it is. After Gohmert wins in the Senate, it's President Cruz, Vice President Paul, maybe Vice President. As long as his dad is still functioning, because I'm going to put his dad as the Fed. The Treasury Secretary.
Okay.
We're going to abolish the Fed, so I don't need anybody there, but he'll be the Treasury Secretary. Louis Gohmert is going to be our Secretary of State.
Okay.
Well, then we need 2 new senators from Texas, which is
Glenn and Pat. Sounds good.
No, it doesn't.
So there it is, Lewis. It is Ted Cruz as president, Rand Paul as vice president, and then Louis Gohmert as Secretary of State. I actually think that Gohmert as Secretary of State is way scarier than Ted Cruz as president.
You know what? When Ted Cruz is president, Rand Paul is vice president, and Louis Gohmert is Secretary of State, Louis Motamedi will be in Europe.
Right. Yeah. So is that, we hear liberals all the time say, oh, I'm moving to Canada, this, that, the other thing. And nobody ever really means it. But if we really got to a point where it's Gohmert, Paul, and Cruz, you would really leave the country.
I would, but I'm also pretty confident Ted Cruz will never even come close to being president of the United States.
By the way, Glenn Beck, in his complete romanticized, enamored view of Ted Cruz, seems to be forgetting that Ted Cruz's wife, Heidi Nelson Cruz, is a regional head of a Goldman Sachs division if you just Google Glenn Beck Goldman Sachs, you'll see all of these Glenn Beck videos where he talks about the infection of Goldman Sachs and the Goldman Sachs connection to running the government. How is it that on the one hand, Glenn Beck is really concerned about the effect of Goldman Sachs on our political and economic system, but at the same time wants a first lady who was an important person at Goldman Sachs? Doesn't really make sense, does it?
No, not just being first lady. I mean, let's talk about the obvious connection between companies like Sachs and Ted Cruz.
Yeah, and again, Glenn Beck it doesn't seem like the facts matter anymore because it's almost like he's in love with what Ted Cruz is doing, the filibuster, defunding Obamacare, this faux patriotism. It's all magical, apparently, in Glenn Beck's mind. One person who often has become that bitter guy screaming at kids to get off of his lawn, John McCain, actually seems to be having a little bit of a moment of clarity here on Obamacare. He's made it very clear on a number of occasions, Lewis, that Republicans are not going to be able to defund Obamacare and that it is the law. And as Real Clear Politics is reporting, Senator John McCain, Republican from Arizona, who lost to President Obama in the presidential election in 2008, is making some sense about this. He said, I want to make sure that my colleagues, and especially those who were not here in 2009, understand that there are many of us who are opposed to Obamacare, as it's called, the Affordable Care Act. And the opposition that we mounted in 2009, it's a matter of record that to start with, the Senate Finance Committee considered the Affordable Care Act over several weeks and approved the bill in October of 2009. Now, that doesn't mean that we give up our efforts to try to replace and repair Obamacare, but it does mean that elections have consequences, and those elections were clear in a significant majority that a majority of the American people supported the President of the United States and renewed his stewardship of this country. I don't like it. It's not something that I wanted the outcome to be, but I think all of us should respect the outcome of elections, which reflects the will of the people. This is such a basic concept, Lewis, which is, okay, we had the election. You did all the dirty tricks during the election. The messing with voter ID and voter suppression and all of that stuff. And in spite of all of that, in spite of the attack ads, President Obama did win. Now, he's going to do stuff, right? And presumably the fact that he won means that he's going to do stuff that his constituents would want, that those who voted for him want him to do. You can't do all the dirty tricks to try to win the election and then also now do all the dirty tricks to stop every bit of legislation. You can't do both.
No, you can't. And I love what John McCain is saying here, that perhaps elected officials should try and represent the will of their constituents. There's really no attempt being made by the majority of them to do that. I think they think for some reason that when you get elected, it means that people trust you to do whatever you want to do. And that's not really how it works.
No, it's not. And then the other thing is the fact that John McCain has to clear this up is really a concerning thing, because in many parts of the world, it's kind of understood that you have the election, you win, and then you are allowed to do stuff without every dirty trick in the book being used to try to stifle what you're doing. And this goes back to the day that President Obama was elected, when those Republicans met with Frank Luntz, and I don't remember the back room of what restaurant in Washington, D.C. it was, and they said, we are going to get in the way at any opportunity that presents itself of anything President Obama wants to do, even if it's bad for the country, because we want to get him out. And I say to them, well, then allow Obamacare to happen, because if you really think it's going to be so bad for the country, as soon as it happens, as soon as it's implemented, it's going to be so bad that all Republicans will be laughing their way to every election victory on the horizon. They know it's not going to happen, Lewis, and that's why they're doing this.
That's pretty much the only reason I can think of. It's political posturing, and it's that. And I hope it backfires, but you never know. There's a lot of people out there who are completely ignorant about all of this.
Big news on the bonus show. The bonus show is kind of evolving into being, I almost think, Lewis, we might want to change the name at some point to the members show, because the bonus show has been taking essentially member submissions of stories. Lewis researches stories for the audience and then presents them. Of course, Lewis hosts and produces the bonus show. and then we discuss it. The bonus show, also known, Lewis, as the members show, is one of many membership benefits. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to sign up. It's a great thing. Support alternatives to corporate media. Check out what we're doing. Support this program. davidpakman.com/membership. Up next, the Tea Party. Does anyone even care about it anymore? We'll look at a new poll.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We're mostly funded by you through our membership program, which is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Liberal Bias, the more you look for it, the more you find it. You can find Liberal Bias in the most unexpected places at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Troy Vakura. Troy, you're a good man. Thanks for being a David Pakman Show member. You should start participating in the bonus show, which is quickly evolving into the members show, directed by members. And Lewis is almost like the co-host and co-producer of the bonus show now, because members, Lewis, have taken just a strong role there.
Yeah, they've been sending me some great ideas, and I will use them.
All right, so in the midst of Ted Cruz and his faux filibuster, exactly what we thought would happen with the Tea Party is happening with the Tea Party. I'm talking, of course, of support of the Tea Party around the country. There's a new Gallup poll. Now, before I give you the numbers from the new Gallup poll, let me remind you, Lewis, just in case people have forgotten, what essentially was our consensus about what would happen with the Tea Party. And we said this years ago, okay? We've now confirmed that the Tea Party was in fact funded. It was AstroTurf. It wasn't grassroots. It was funded by Koch brothers and big corporations. So years ago, we said that one of two things would happen with the Tea Party. Number one, the Tea Party would essentially disappear in the sense that the ideas and or specific Tea Party candidates would probably be voted out, or they would no longer be members of the Tea Party. Or number two, any remnants of the Tea Party would simply become assimilated into the broader Republican Party, and the Tea Party on its own would not really have much clout. The numbers seem to confirm that. Fewer Americans now describe themselves as supporters of the Tea Party movement than did at the height of that movement in 2010, or even at the start of 2012. Today's 22% support nearly matches the record low from 2 years ago. There's been essentially no recovery at all. The Tea Party just seems to be dead in the water. If we look at some more specific numbers, this is the most fascinating thing, Lewis. Opponents of the Tea Party outnumber supporters of the Tea Party 27% to 22%. That's fine. This is the most fascinating thing. 51% of Americans are neither supporters nor opponents of the Tea Party. In other words, they have no opinion or simply do not care. It's almost worse to have people just absolutely indifferent to what you're doing. They're not for it. They're not against it. They could not care less about what you're doing because they don't consider you legitimate. For all of the hundreds of millions of dollars at this point, or certainly tens of millions of dollars that have poured into a combination of Tea Party groups and Tea Party candidates, the fact that more than half of America just doesn't give about the Tea Party, that to me is way worse than having 20% oppose what you're doing.
Yeah, I guess so. Essentially, it's just disappearing or just integrating into the GOP as we predicted. And now we just have to wait and see what the next group that pops up is and try to find out who's funding them. Yeah,
and really, if we're going to have a successful third party, it can't be AstroTurf funded by people and then bringing in individuals who are advocating for things they wouldn't even benefit from. Like as we talked about, most of those who identify themselves as Tea Partiers would not benefit from defunding Obamacare. They wouldn't benefit from tax cuts for the rich. Yet they advocate for these things. Makes no sense. There's an article in the New York Times about a number of homeless individuals, including one homeless woman in particular, a 37-year-old mother, named Alpha Menzueta, who works 2 jobs and is still living at a homeless shelter. And we've talked so many times at this point, Lewis, about the minimum wage and evaluating whether working a full-time job, 40 hours a week, or even 45 hours a week in many parts of this country does not allow you, at the minimum wage, does not allow you to afford an apartment, does not allow you to afford basic housing. And that is by definition proof that the minimum wage is nowhere near a living wage. And there's concurrent to the minimum wage issues and the living wage issues, there is this stereotype that if you're homeless, you're lazy and not working and not capable. You don't even have the most basic skills to do any kind of job. And that's just flat out false. As this New York Times article explores, we have here the example of a 37-year-old mother who ends one job at 7 a.m., heads to the homeless shelter where she is with her kid for 5 hours, and then starts her next job at 12 noon. And with what it costs to live here in New York City, she still is not able to afford to get out of that homeless shelter. This, to me, is something that, by virtue of not being much of a discussion, not being much of a presence in people's minds, is distorting the views of most Americans on poverty, on the minimum wage, and on homelessness. Because if you understand, Lewis, that you can be working 2 jobs and still not even be able to afford the most basic apartment, this is a fundamental problem that's not going to be resolved by trickle down. It's not going to be resolved by giving the rich tax cuts to supposedly hire people, which they won't do, by the way, with a tax cut. This needs to be part of the dialogue.
It does, definitely. But you know what? It can be part of the dialogue at the state level too. In this case, we don't necessarily have to rely on a federal mandate, right, to provide a livable wage to all people. I mean, we can just hope that cities and states realize that the stimulative effect of paying people like this more will benefit them.
Yeah, you can, but all you'll be doing is hoping, Lewis, because unfortunately, while many states are going above and beyond the federal minimum wage, many states that are particularly right-wing states are never going to do that. They will always keep the minimum wage as low as possible, and they will always keep spending on social programs as low as possible and on education. So you're right. We can hope that that will happen at the state level, and in some states it is happening, but that's not going to be the solution.
Probably not. But David, let's be hopeful.
George Zimmerman's estranged wife is now revealing she has doubts about George Zimmerman's innocence. Well, I have to tell you, Lewis, I'm shocked. No, I'm not. We heard, number one, a few days ago that Shelley Zimmerman can't even get her attorney to serve George Zimmerman with divorce papers because nobody can find him. Nobody knows where George Zimmerman is. And now she did an interview with Matt Lauer on the Today Show on NBC, where she talked not only about what happened a couple of weeks ago when George Zimmerman supposedly, allegedly hit her father, punched him in the nose, and threatened her with a gun, and also about issues relating to the killing of Trayvon Martin. Check this out.
You said that he had his hand on a gun, he was threatening you, you said he was going to shoot you when you called 911, that he continually had his hand on that gun. As you know, police say they never confiscated a gun, they never even laid eyes on a gun. Do you stand by your story completely?
Absolutely. I absolutely stand by my story.
You saw a gun, you saw him place his hand on a gun, you had visual contact or confirmation that he had a gun and was threatening you with it.
I did not see a gun, but I know my husband. I saw him in a stance and a look in his eyes that I've never seen before. His shirt was halfway unbuttoned, and he was putting his hand in his shirt and saying, "Please step closer. Please step closer." And so I think that just logically I assumed he had a gun on him.
If you don't know what he's capable of, you say he threatened you with a gun, you say he punched your father in the nose, why didn't you press charges?
In hindsight, I should have, and I really regret that. But I'm on probation, and the officers made it very clear that day that if I pressed charges, we were all going to go to jail, and I would have been the only one to stay there.
Okay, so I don't even know where to start my thoughts on this, Lewis. I mean, first, again, we we know that Police Chief Steve Bracknell has described George Zimmerman as a Sandy Hook waiting to happen. We know much more now than we did even during the George Zimmerman trial about the state of mind that Zimmerman was in when he went out, presumably very upset that the woman that he hoped to be able to control fully, Shelley Zimmerman, had decided to leave him. And he went out there and he decided to create the confrontation that led to him allegedly fearing for his life, which created the legal justification under which he shot Trayvon Martin in self-defense, according to the letter of the law. And it's abundantly clear. I mean, I just don't know how much more plain can we make what is going on here and what inevitably at some point is going to happen with this man.
Yeah, I think it definitely shows some of the holes in our legal system. And unlike Ted Nugent, I'm going to say that I think with certitude that George Zimmerman will be dead or in jail within, let's say, 5 years.
Is that right? So unlike the Ted Nugent prediction about himself with a 1-year time frame, you're giving it 60 months for George Zimmerman to either be dead or in jail.
Yes, that's right.
All right. Well, comment on what Lewis thinks here. Lewis here, surprisingly not advocating for the locking up of someone, as some of our viewers often say Lewis does when we talk about legal cases, but just predicting that someone will be locked up by virtue of something they'll end up doing sometime in the next 5 years. I have to tell you, it would be, my surprise level would be -1 when I hear, if and when I hear that George Zimmerman has been arrested for some kind of crime or killed by someone because he was involved in something he shouldn't have been. Let's take a break. Next, we will talk to Dennis Campbell about the new Iranian president, the diplomatic snub of President Obama, and more.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Dennis Campbell's with us. He's editor-in-chief of UK Progressive Magazine. He also hosts Worldview with Dennis Campbell on YouTube at youtube.com/worldviewshow. Dennis, we talked a couple of days ago on the show about the election of Iranian President Rouhani and the possibility that his statements expressing some interest in having diplomatic conversations with the United States, in letting us figure out exactly what is going on with that nuclear program, which he has said never intended to make nuclear weapons. So we've been exploring the possibility of newfound diplomatic talks with Iran. And now, of course, we have this snub of President Obama. Explain to us what happened.
Well, depending on whose account you believe, the president was supposed to accidentally bump into Rouhani. Now, whenever somebody says someone's about to accidentally bump into another world leader, that is usually a very well planned and orchestrated event. In this case, it looks as though it's a snub on one level. It's a very badly mishandled press opportunity by the White House press office, which has had a history of these sorts of things. At the very least, it's an embarrassment to the president. At the most, it's more Putin-like behavior, trying to show the world that the United States is not as strong as they used to be.
So, what exactly does the possibility of some newfound diplomatic conversations between Iran and the U.S. And Iran and other U.S. allies actually look like at this point? Is that a realistic expectation?
Who knows? I mean, with the start of every new administration, and particularly democratic administrations, there is this tendency to sort of paint things with a much rosier outlook. For example, back in the 90s, when Bill Clinton assumed office, he traded the Mujahideen al-Khaliq, or the People's Mujahideen of Iran, the resistance movement, basically put them on the terror watch list as a payback to hopefully make the new regime look more favorably and consider stopping their nuclear programs and their basic troublemaking in the region. Nothing happened then. Nothing happens now. The key thing to remember with Iran is that the mullahs, the ayatollahs, the clerics control everything, and Rouhani has his own Tea Party, in the form of those clerics. These are the hardliners. These are the ones who are chanting death to America, calling America the great Satan. Those are the ones in the street with the demonstrations.
Well, let's so that people have a little more information on that, Dennis. I have in front of me some of the pictures from this military parade that took place in Iran, and this was simultaneous to the Iranian president making some overtones and doing some diplomatic showings here in the U.S. You have signs where, while in English they said "Down with America," in Persian and Arabic they said "Death to America," for example.
Exactly,
And I have a number of these. So it appears that behind the scenes, not much has changed, as you're alluding to.
Well, it's you don't all of a sudden undo 30 years of hostilities in one day. I mean, and this is, I think, is why Israel is very concerned. I think what President Obama wants to accomplish in his second term is what every second-term U.S. president wants to abolish: some sort of broad signature peace deal in the Middle East. Whether it's Jimmy Carter with Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin. Somebody can have either a Camp David Accord or a summit where everybody comes together, agrees that things are going to change, but nothing really does change. And so until and unless you see major changes there, you're not going to see much change in the way in which the U.S. is treated. What I love is how the U.S. mainstream media has just bubbled over and frothed at the mouth since he was elected at this new, again, quote unquote, moderate Iranian president. Let's keep in mind that this Rouhani, Dr. Rouhani, has been in the government for quite some time. He's been with the hardliners, and he may be the more moderate-looking face, but history has shown us that they will tend to do in Iran whatever they want to do. Now, the pressure is likely to come from inside the country. They're facing a lot of the same economic problems, largely because of sanctions against them. They have a very dispirited young population, but like in most of the Middle East, the average age is under the age of 30, while the power lies with the people who are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, just as we saw in Egypt. So if there is revolutionary change, it's likely to come from within. Rouhani is trying to say the right things to keep those people satisfied, but he's also walking that tightrope, and he knows he has to keep the hardliners satisfied as well.
Yeah, and what would be you're bringing up something we've discussed often, which is similarly to how the majority of the constituents of the Catholic Church don't agree with the Catholic Church positions on most social issues. The average Iranian citizen does not also represent the views from the regime, but I'm curious, more broadly speaking, when Syria was being discussed, the effect and importance of how it would affect Iran was being discussed. When we've talked about any number of uprisings in the Middle East, Iran seems to be kind of in the background as either an ally, a fomenter of what's going on, or otherwise involved there. So would there be some very specific to Iran significance of an increase in newfound diplomatic relations?
Well, they're clearly becoming, if they weren't already, a major power in that region. I mean, they've got a relatively stable government, they've got a relatively stable military, and they have a lot of power. They're very much involved in Iraq. Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki is a complete puppet of the Iranian regime, because the one thing Maliki doesn't want to have happen is a repeat of the Iran-Iraq war, because it's likely they would lose this time. They don't have as organized a military in Iraq as they did under Saddam. When you look at Jordan, you look at a country that is feeling a tremendous amount of pressure from over 2 million refugees out of Syria. They're also seeing the hard right-wing clerical militant side being stoked by Iran. The Muslim Brotherhood were supported by Iran. They're sticking their fingers wherever they can to mess things up. Same in Turkey, same in other parts. And they like that instigator and that newfound power role, even if they don't have the economic power because of the sanctions to back it up. So it's a real dangerous situation. Should we proceed, and should we be trying to deal with this administration? Yes, but trust and verify.
All right, Dennis Campbell, editor-in-chief of UK Progressive Magazine. Check him out on YouTube, youtube.com/worldviewshow. Dennis, great to talk to you. Thanks for being here.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
A Florida man has attempted to pay his water bill with cocaine. At least that's how it's being reported by the Daytona Beach News Journal. Police are looking for a man who showed up, dropped off an envelope filled with cocaine at the city's water office. He reportedly walked right up to a clerk and handed her an unmarked envelope that contained a clear plastic bag with 3 grams of cocaine in it, according to NBC Miami. This is typically the counter where people come up to pay their bills. So one point of view, Lewis, is that it was an attempt to actually pay the bill. The other point of view was the guy maybe thought he was supposed to drop off drugs for someone at that location, and nobody figured it out. I don't know.
Very strange story. I can't imagine anyone thinking that this would be okay in any situation. I mean, if it was a drop-off, why would it be in a public city building like that? It's very bizarre.
Yeah, the man was wearing a t-shirt and shorts, and he came in right before 10 a.m. a few days ago and handed the envelope over, walked out, got on a bicycle, and just left. You know, Lewis, I actually once tried to pay my electrical bill with 5 chickens, and they didn't accept it, surprisingly enough.
You know, the good news for this guy is he left on a bicycle, so no one could really get his plate number and run that.
The craziest thing is everyone knows in Florida you can only use meth to pay for those bills, not cocaine. That was really the amateur mistake that a guy made.
I hear bath salts are also widely accepted.
A woman ran a half marathon and ended up winning a full marathon by mistake. Has this ever happened to you, Lewis, that you accidentally ran 13 extra miles?
You know, I'd be shocked if I ever ran an extra 1 mile accidentally.
This was out of Ontario, where the CBC is reporting that Meredith Fitzmaurice planned to run a half marathon. I just don't understand how this happens. In the Run for Heroes in Amherstburg, Ontario, she wanted to do it as a test run to hopefully eventually qualify for the Boston Marathon. And she missed a turn on the half marathon route and ended up running the full marathon, and then convinced whoever organized the race to count her full marathon time, which was the best score for someone in that race. I have to tell you, I do a little bit of running. I'm not like a big runner. I've never even accidentally run a quarter mile longer than I intended to, never mind 13 miles.
Yeah, I don't know how you could make this mistake. I mean, I guess if you're really motivated and you're just completely in the zone, you just go until you see the finish line and you're not even thinking about anything else.
Yeah, the other thing that doesn't really make sense is just time-wise. If you're talking about 13 miles, like she ran it in the full marathon in 3 hours and 12 minutes, okay? That means that your 13-mile time, your half marathon time, would be, I don't know, roughly an hour and 35 minutes or so. Don't you realize that it's been hours and you're still running? Like at some point you'd think you would know what was going on.
There's something interesting here, and I think if you really have no idea how far you've gone or how far you are going, maybe somehow that you know, you won't psych yourself out, and it will improve your performance.
Yeah, maybe so. I know that, you know, at gyms, you often see people covering the distance on the treadmills, like with a towel or magazine, because they just think if I'm not keeping track so closely, I'll probably have gone further than I thought before I know it. It's never been my strategy, I have to say, but again, I've never accidentally run a full marathon either. So yeah, what can you do? Voicemail, 219-2DavidP. I'm only going to play one voicemail today because the voicemail has so many points of absurdity that I have to respond point by point. Let's get right into this, Lewis.
David Pakman, this is Troy York from Little Rock, Arkansas. I have 2 questions for you. First of all, you talk about how the Sikh religion, how they're often mistaken for Muslims in this country, and that they're attacked. And I just was just wondering you seek religion if there's some inability for them to adapt and dress like Americans. I mean, I don't understand why these people from India come over here and they don't assimilate like earlier immigrants. And perhaps if they didn't dress like Muslims, they wouldn't friggin' be attacked.
All right, so let's stop right there. They're not dressed like Muslims. That's exactly the point. It's only ignorant people who don't realize that they are not dressed like Muslims who think they are Muslims. So this voicemail, in trying to point out a simple solution by saying, hey, if you stop dressing like a Muslim, you won't be mistaken for a Muslim anymore. That's the point, Lewis. They're not dressing like Muslims.
And why should they have to assimilate? I mean, first of all, they're wearing religious garments, which, you know, I don't see why they should have to wear a Red Sox hat and a Yankees jersey. They're wearing actual religious garments. It's part of their religion.
Let's continue with the voicemail.
Muslims. You know, that's the problem with these today's immigrants. If they don't want to assimilate, they want to still live like they're living over halfway across the globe. And another comment, I don't understand how the hell you can equate and compare Christian terrorism to abortion bombing. One lone bomber who might bomb an abortion clinic, and the very rare so-called Christian terrorism, how you can equate that to Islamic terrorism, suicide bombers that kill like 80 people in the church in Pakistan. And I was wondering why you didn't say nothing about that. And
yeah, let's stop right there. Number one, we just covered, I got an email from someone else who also said, hey, I'm sure, or a voicemail saying, I'm sure you're not going to cover that Christian church bombing. Yeah, we covered it. We talked about it. We condemned it. So that's completely bogus. But this idea, Lewis, that even every premise presented in this voicemail as a question is wrong. I mean, even that premise of the rare Christian bombing or domestic terror, look at the list of domestic terrorism incidents over the last 15 years in the United States. Almost every one of them was committed by someone who was not foreign born and was Christian. I mean, it's just factually true. That's the majority of them. So the premise is just absolutely wrong. And Lewis, the saddest thing about this voicemail, and we'll play the last bit of it, is that if you can't even understand basic facts in order to put together a premise that's logical, you're never going to get good conclusions, right? Garbage in, garbage out. We've heard that before.
Yeah, clearly this person will never have their mind changed about Islamic folks living in our country. It's a shame.
Let's listen to the end of the voicemail.
This number of Islamic attacks at places of worship.
Yeah.
I think if you notice one thing, Christians, evangelical Christians, they put their hands in the air to the heavens,
right,
when they pray, and Muslims, and quite interesting, kiss the ground, and I think that shows you pretty much who they worship, just the way they pray. All right, David Pakman, this is Christian Troy York fighting the battle against liberals and Islamic devil worshippers. Thank you.
So listen, Troy, I have to tell you, if you're going to keep fighting this battle, you've got to be armed with facts rather than hyperbole and talking points that would be found on Fox News or on the bottom of someone's shoe. I mean, it's a very, very sad situation. This voicemail, I think, is a fascinating sociological and cultural snippet, Lewis, from what we're dealing with when we're fighting for some semblance and some injection of logic and reason in this country. We're up against that. We're up against a voicemail that contains 2 or 3 questions/conclusions, all based simply on false premises. It's tough.
It's tough. We can only hope that some nice Islamic person befriends this man and changes his mind so that he realizes not every Muslim in the world is trying to kill him.
Yeah, that would be a good realization to come to as just a first step. Join us on the bonus show, quickly becoming known as the Members Show, davidpakman.com/membership. We will be back on Monday with a brand new show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.